Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Financial Brand webinar. We'll get started in a couple minutes as we let people join. Hope everyone is having a good Wednesday. Sort of a grayish, blustery day in New York, where I'm based. Hope you guys are having better weather than where you are.
Better than snow, Tony. Better than snow.
Oh, you're having snow. Okay.
No, I'm
Excellent.
not, but I would say better than dealing with snow right now.
That's what you get for living up north. Okay, we'll get started in just a minute. Give it another, we're 2 minutes in. Why don't we get started? I think that, thank you for joining. Welcome, everyone. Um, this is the Financial Brand webinar on the new rules for customer acquisition and performance marketing in the age of AI. I'm Tony Hooper. I head up the client services team at iQuanti, a digital marketing solutions company that brings together creativity, analytics, and technology to drive critical outcomes for our clients, most of whom are in the banking and financial services industry. I want to introduce one of our valued clients, Milroy Siva, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Capitus. Welcome, Milroy. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and Capitus?
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and always great to connect. So, welcome everyone. Again, I'm Milroy. I am the SVP and Head of Marketing at Capitus. A little bit about Capitus. We're a provider of financing solutions for small and medium-sized businesses in the U.S. We've been around since 2006. We've originated about 7 billion in financing and brokered, I would say, about another billion on top of that over our time frame. And then in terms of myself, I've been with Capita since 2017, came in through an acquisition. And in my current role as head of marketing, I would say I really focus on three main areas: acquisitions and lifetime value growth, brand, and then analytics in general. So I think all three of those fit nicely into our conversation today.
Excellent. Yes, it's you guys have a great company and it's great working with you and I'm really grateful for you to join me today in this conversation. So our focus over the next 30, 40 minutes will be on some collective insights on customer acquisition and performance marketing and looking toward 2026. We'll also save some time to answer some questions that the audience may have. So to the audience, please use the Q&A dashboard on your window to add any questions, and we'll review those and get to those toward the end. But I do have several questions for Milroy to kick things off. So are you ready to get started?
Let's jump into it.
Let's do it. So as we focus on 2026, I always find it's a good thing to start with a brief retrospective. So, in your view, how has customer acquisition evolved for financial services marketers in recent years?
Yeah, straight into the million-dollar question, I suppose, right? So, before I jump into the specifics, let's frame that a little bit. So, the way I sort of look at the world or any type of problem I'm trying to solve often is a little bit of game theory, and I try to understand, okay, who are the players on the board and what does the board look like? So, if we were to look at that within financial services and financial industries in general, you've got your, providers or lenders of any type of product. You've got obviously the users or customers. Um, Depending on the product or service, you may have a broker involved in the equation. And then, of course, you've got the board, which could represent course, either regulations or the economic impact with any given situation. So now going through each one of those, there's AI has been impactful in a lot of different ways for each one of those components that I just went through. So when you look at providers or lenders, Obviously, there's been a shift in terms of the types of campaigns that are out there when it comes to acquisition. There's a lot more focus on aligning with what users or customers are looking for and what they bring to the table in the initial conversation. And then there's a higher reliance on data. Um, I think when it comes to users, there's an expectation whenever they reach out to someone about any type of financial product, and that expectation has been evolving at a very aggressive rate with the introduction of AI. And so it's up to us in any financial capacity to sort of meet or exceed what that expectation is. So that's really all conceptually, all the changes that are happening on the provider or lender side. From a user's perspective, the world's at your fingertips right now. There's a lot more information out there to dig into before you make your first initial point of contact. And that could be whether it's general research, whether it's comparative reviews. There's just a ton of data out there, and AI just gives them a window to be able to navigate through that in a much more adaptable way. And so that they're going to be bringing that to the table on any initial conversation with any financial provider, regardless of the product. And so that behavior is very net new because of AI, but it's still very much evolving because of how AI is changing in itself. So it's very much a moving target. And in terms of the board, or what I've called the board, which again can represent either the economy or regulations around AI, that in itself is also a bit of a moving target. When you think about compliancy, when you think about regulations, and when you think about even things like liability in terms of what an LLM or any type of AI model can draw from in terms of their pool of data, that's very much a moving target as well. So something that any marketer that's addressing a particular audience needs to be aware of that at any given point in time that could obviously change. So there's quite a few changes that have happened in the last year. All of it, a lot of it is moving targets, but for the most part, very much a scenario that we can navigate through and draw value from.
Makes sense. So great. So now that we know the game, let's start to focus on going forward, how you see some of those pieces changing, or are they continuing those trends? Are there other shifts that you're anticipating going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say there's probably three that stand out. The first one is sort of a continuation of a trend that we're already seeing in 2025. It's the adoption of AI, especially from the user base, from the customer base. That's not going anywhere. If anything, what to expect in 2026 is that behavior is going to evolve along with the adoption rate go up. More folks are going to use AI when it comes to research, when it comes to answering basic questions, or even deep diving into larger questions and more specific questions. That's not going away. That's only going to continue to grow. The behavioral part may change as well as more folks become more comfortable with using AI. In today's world, if someone who's never used AI would ask a question, it may be a very basic or very generic question, but as we look into 2026, the way someone may prompt an LLM, I think is going to change drastically, where now they're giving much more contextual information, much more specific information to their scenario and their business and their makeup and their profile. They're going to be expecting a lot more personalized answers out of AI, which I think is, again, that the amount of folks that are going to expect that, I expect that to grow in 2026 compared to 2025. The second bucket that I see changing, again, is a trend that we're seeing in 2025, but I expect it to continue to grow in 2026, is the the overall sensitivity to data privacy and data security. It's a bit of a tug of war when you think about AI in general. From a provider's perspective, you need more data points in order to provide something that's very personalized in terms of an experience or product or whatever it may be. But from a user's experience, you're trying to limit how much information about yourself or about your business goes out into the world unless you have consented to it, and then rightfully so. So that's going to be I think, in 2026, a much more heightened issue and much more sensitive from a user base, where you are going to see active actions to sort of limit how much information goes out there. So that seems sort of counterintuitive to where the equilibrium is going to be, but nonetheless something that any marketer, again in 2026, would have to be aware of. And the final piece I would say is a bit of reflection on 2025. There's multiple studies done on this, but they all have a very common theme or common thread, and that is that the majority of enterprise level AI investments in 2025 didn't pan out in terms of generating a positive ROI. I think the last number I saw was out of MIT, which was 95% of enterprise level investment, AI investments did not yield a positive ROI. That doesn't mean that our AI investments are going away. I think what that is going to translate to in 2026 is a lot more companies are going to take a step back and say, okay, what was the common thread here? Why did so many investments not pan out or didn't turn out the way we expected it to? And I think that is going to result in most likely two streams or two sets of answers. One is, what is the goal, and did we define that properly, and did we define what an acceptable error rate is? Because even with AI, there are errors depending on what you are expecting it to do. Did we walk into any particular investment or any particular type of project, understanding what is our spectrum for acceptability? I think that's going to be one piece. And the second piece of that, I think, is sort of the base of the structure for AI to thrive in. It needs a good feedback loop. It needs a good data set. It needs the appropriate structures to thrive. Not everything is just search related, and a lot of it can be a variety of outputs that you're expecting AI to do. So if you don't have the appropriate base in place and you're just hoping that, I can invest in AI and have a plug and play solution, it's probably not going to pan out. So I think there's going to be a lot of reflection on those two fronts. And that's going to be a significant change in 2026 because companies aren't going to make the same mistake again. They're going to look at what happened in 2025 and say, okay, we've seen all these investments that didn't pan out. Let's not repeat that. Let's make sure that we have the appropriate structures in place. So I think that's going to change in 2026 as well.
That makes sense. And look, I'm hearing a couple things in how you describe that. There's the changes that and shifts in continued shifts in customer behavior to become more informed, using LLMs to be more informed consumers or buyers of your products going forward. That's one. And then how brands and teams deploy these tools and AI initiatives, the focus on ROI will become more and more important, I think, as I'm sure you're already seeing within your organization. We're seeing that across a number of
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any investment out there, I mean, the first question I often get is, what's the expected ROI or return on this investment, right? So I don't think too many people are outside of that scenario. We often ask that, regardless of what the investment or the project may look like. So I think putting yourself in a position to succeed and a position to drive value starts at the ground level. There needs to be the appropriate setup there. And I think people, again, are just going to be much more sensitive to making sure that that's in place, given what we've seen in 2025.
100%. Going back to the user base, I think one challenge that we're seeing with our clients and other clients has been if you're trying to get the message out about your brand to those prospects, control and users are being more informed through LLMs and other places. Your ability to control the message in the LLMs becomes tough, right? Because it's not about you putting out a campaign with a copy that you have that's approved, or even how your site reads. A lot of it is the information that users are looking at is being drawn from other sources. And
Yeah,
even
yeah,
talking about your own brand, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I think the last bit you said in terms of your own brand is sort of a critical point there. It really depends. It starts with what the product or service that you're looking to market out there. And now, given that we're talking about financial services and financial products out here, for the most part, we're talking about either commodities or commodity-like type products. In the world of SKUs, just as a comparable, that is going to be there's going to be a significant difference there because I can ask based on my needs, should I get an iPhone or should I get an Android phone? And it's going to be a very direct comparison that I can have in terms of what my needs are and what my likes and dislikes are. So any type of SKU based industry, that is obviously going to have a very different look and feel in the future. But when it comes to, again, commodities and services and things of that nature, a lot more soft variables that have to be assessed by AI. That's going to be tough for any LLM to really drive down and put their stamp and say, this is what I've determined about a particular brand. And so often the default that occurs in that scenario is they're going to look at what is the brand alignment? Does this brand say, I have the best customer service in my industry, right? Or I am the quickest to process. They look for those types of cues and really try to gravitate their answers towards the brand alignment. So that will, by all measures, really force marketers to really say, okay, do I have a brand vision? Do I have a brand North Star in terms of what values I should be communicating out there? Because whether you show up on a comparative site or not, if your name comes up in a comparative piece from an LLM, it's going to draw from these sort of brand values that it's able to pull out there from the web. So it's up to you to make sure that that is in line with what you would expect, and then there's consistency against any time your name comes up, you're known as the fastest processor, the best customer, whatever that value prop may be.
Yeah, agreed. And what we also see there, and we'll move into what do you do about this, but what we also sometimes see is that as the LLMs may be drawing from third-party sites uh, like affiliates, for example, at least in consumer financial services, it's incumbent upon companies to have PR and outreach to those publications to ensure that their content is accurate, including things like rates and such that might be getting pulled in. So it's a new task, I think, for marketers to pay attention to that and creates different sets of actions that you have to follow. So speaking of that, let's talk about with all these changes in this AI-driven landscape, how are marketers like yourself sort of approaching your acquisition strategy to address some of these shifts?
Yeah, so again, three buckets come to mind. I think the first one we sort of touched on quite heavily. It's adapting and aligning with the new behaviors that we're seeing on the user and customer side. There's there's more search happening, there's more discovery happening, there's more comparative work being done. Um, from your end, you need to be able to align with that. And I think that's going to be a significant shift to be able to, again, meet or exceed expectations wherever you can. The second piece I would say is, again, driven by changes in user behaviors. There's going to be, with those expectations, a sense of immediacy, a sense of specificity, personalization, all the other buzzwords to say, hey, this is made for me. That sort of expectation is going to be there. So from a provider or lenders or side, how do you generate that, right? That's going to be driven by a lot of, um, what data points can you capture, what data points can, or what insights can you assess from the data points that you capture in order to be able to craft something that is, again, very much tailored towards an individual or an individual business. So I think that's going to be another piece that, very much invested in right now, and it's a lot of businesses are going to be following suit as well. I think the third piece in that is really research. And, we've talked a lot about the users and the customer base having a wealth of knowledge out there and being able to navigate through this because of AI. That's available to us too. And so it's a bit of a big blue ocean because there's tons of information out there. But I think if crafted the right way, there is a wealth of information that it can really help any company, do self-assessments, understand where am I in the board right now relative to the other players that are on the board. how strong is my presence versus how niche is my presence. There's a lot of questions out there, and market research is not a new tactic by any means, but with the use of AI, this is a wealth or a whole new avenue of the type of market research to be done as well, and which I think is fairly critical that we all assume we know what our presence is in the market, depending on our product and service. That needs to be justified or confirmed through any type of research. So I think that last piece in terms of looking at AI research in general from our perspective is going to be absolutely critical.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Can you give an example there of like something the audience could take away right away to on what would be the first thing you would do to conduct that self-assessment using these new tools?
Yeah, I think if something you want to take away, let's take a step back and just think about, for anyone on the call, what does your customer base look like, or what does your user base look like, right? And how do you define that, right? So I'll give a very basic example. If you're a B2B product or B2B service, maybe you're looking at a variety of industries, maybe you're looking at, buckets of revenue, something along those lines. You could easily craft a variety of segments and then say, look, this is my sweet spot. These are the types of businesses that I work with. This might be a little bit outside my spectrum, and then there's a bit of a medium spot within there. So something that you could do at a very basic level if you want to do some AI research is if you were to run a bunch of queries, a bunch of prompts through any type of LLM, is if I was a business that represented a particular segment and I'm looking for your particular product, who are the top five, what are the top five options that I have? Just something as simple as that is going to give you across, your firmographic grid where you stand on the board because your name's going to show up in a couple of those boxes, but maybe not in others. But it's going to be a very clear-cut way for you to understand, okay, based on what my ranking and what my presence is and what my brand alignment is, where am I showing up? And the first question should be, okay, wherever am I showing up? Is that my sweet spot? Is that aligned with who my target audience is? And for all the areas that it isn't, that gives you your directive straight away. I clearly don't resonate or I'm not aligning with a target audience, and I've got some work to do there. You also have the other side of the coin where you may show up and it's a segment or target audience that maybe you service, but maybe not a critical component in your strategy. Nice to have, nice to know, but what do you do with that information as well? But it all starts with just understanding where are you on the board. So I think something as simple as doing some initial prompting and research against a firmographic grid, or if you're talking about a consumer-based or personal type product based on whatever metrics that you can use to generate a grid. I think that's a good way to just get a lay of the land because that pinpoints and gives you very specific directions on, hey, here are my strong points, here are my weak points, and I've got some work to do.
That's a great example. I'm licking my chops thinking I want to go do that right after this meeting for my own business. So
Yeah.
that's great. Thanks for that. So taking the execution a little bit further, how to execute, we've been talking to a lot of clients, and I was curious in your take about how you're trying to bring or align data, creativity, and automation to drive growth for your business. So if you think about all these shifts, what the strategies need to be, like how do you bring it together sort of in that execution model with those three pillars?
So I think there's a order of operations to follow there. Whenever you talk about a cohesive strategy, I think for me, um, always starts with the foundation. So if you're talking about, again, data being a critical part of whatever your AI initiative may be, let's assess that. Do you feel like you have a very good structure and hierarchy for your data piece? Do you have a dedicated resource that can align or make whatever modifications are needed in your data structure or data hierarchy? Again, it really depends on what the output of the AI initiative is. But for the most part, it starts with how good is the data? Because the LLM, for the most part, is feeding off a rich database. And if you're using proprietary or first-party data, it starts there. How good is that data and is it structured the appropriate way so that NLM can build off of that? That's number one before any other tactic is into place. So I would say just making sure that's a good self-assessment there. Is there a resource to manage that? I think that's number one. The second is, drawing back from an earlier point I made on um, investments in AI not naturally panning out, which I think a lot of assumptions were made that it would in 2025. I think it's good to really start small with AI and sort of build your way up towards a very much more robust implementation. And the reason I say that is when it comes to use cases with AI, when it comes to leveraging, especially first-party or proprietary data, there's a lot of nuances to data, to implementation, and to use cases. So starting small, and when I say small, I think the best way to think about it is there an existing process in your world today that you just could amplify? And I think that way you're stepping into a scenario that you already understand because the process already exists in your world. So any type of nuances around the process of the data, the company or yourself should inherently already know. So it's easy to sort of pinpoint strengths and weaknesses as AI is being integrated into any type of process. Once that has been established, now you can start building off. I think, again, a lot of mistakes that have occurred in 2025 is you straight away jump into an AI project where you say, I'm going to build something net new, something we've never done before. I'm just going to plug in AI and it's going to solve my problems. That can happen, but the probability is probably not in your favor. So I think doing things the right way in terms of building up rather than sort of just jumping in is probably something that just a lot more companies going to adapt to and really structure how they roll out new projects, given again what's going on in 2020 to 2025. And then the final piece is just talking about your team and your internal resources. I obviously mentioned a dedicated resource towards the data side, but now you've got to talk about everything else from your creative, automations and whatnot. And there's most likely going to there's going to be a need for some upskilling just so that folks already on your team are aware and can jump into AI projects. But having a North Star, I would say, is really what aligns people the best, rather than the details in the tactics. Giving folks details without a North Star, it's easy to have two folks working really hard, but somehow they've had some sort of misalignment or walking in different directions. There has to be a North Star is we are making an investment in AI and we expect it to do this, whatever that this is, whether it's create something, whether it's automate something, whether it is analyze something. There has to be some clear definition on what the North Star and what the ask is. And as simple as that sounds, funny enough, that doesn't happen a lot, right? Which is why you fall into these pit traps of miscommunications and inefficiencies creeping into any given initiative. So I think as long as the root, the base of any given project, the definitions of any projects, and the resources involved in a project are upskilled or brought together in the appropriate way, that's really the foundation. AI can touch across a variety of initiatives. So it's really tough to give a very specific set of steps of here's what you need to do in your next 2 days. But understanding the methodology is really where you're going to be able to yield value no matter what the initiative is.
I think that's very powerful. And it's interesting you mentioned hey, it's okay to start small and learn and as you go, and there are third-party tools out there that are obviously coming up all the time, but there is some are quite powerful to help improve existing processes that you have in very discrete ways. For example, we've been working with a vendor that uses an AI agent to help adjust uses predictive modeling to see if your paid search ads for your own branded terms are getting conquested. And depending on whether or not it is determining they are, it will adjust bids to make sure you're at the top, but it'll bring the bids down if you're not getting conquested, which is a nice way to drive efficiency in your media spend there and but without sacrificing results. So I thought was a great example of a kind of that smaller use case that hey, go learn, figure out how does this work. Again, you have to invest in a little bit of technology there, but those are examples of things you could stand up for sure.
Yeah, and
Um,
what I like about that example, that's a great anecdote there. I would say is, if even if that tool didn't exist, that team fully understands what the concept and the process is because it's existing. So as
yes.
AI gets involved in that piece, whether prices go up or down, or you're looking at an ROI on a particular ad spend in any given month or time frame, you're able to understand the nuances of whether you're actually generating more value, or it's more indicative of something happening in the market, or indicative of something that's happening more within the competitive space of a particular bid. You can easily tell from the data, or you have a better chance of telling within the data that yes, this investment is actually generating value for me, rather than I'm seeing, efficiency go up and down.
Right, for sure, for sure. The structural team dynamic you had mentioned or alluded to too. We have some clients who are starting to create more pod structures. You mentioned having your data piece there, but actually having data scientists sitting with your creative team, with your campaign managers, and get into that test and learn mode together as a tighter team. Which we've seen that starting in a couple places, which is interesting because we know, especially with more large enterprise financial services companies, there are some huge silos that can, reduce the velocity of getting those learnings very quickly if you're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen that even on our end. It's look, when I look at even my division, it's not that I try to run a flat division, but I do want any given function or individual to be able to at least understand the basic concepts from a related function as well. And you kind of mentioned the idea of siloed initiatives and siloed knowledge. That's very real, especially when data is involved, because you have a lot of skills within that world that are hyper focused and very specialized. But often I've seen is you can have a mismatch when it comes to understanding business nuances as to what the data means. And that without a bridge, you can easily act on uh, I won't say a relevant insight, but maybe one that's not as impactful. And
Yeah,
vice versa, maybe miss something that was impactful. That's a very,
absolutely.
very, very common example that I've seen not only in our world, but just from, the other folks I chatted with as well. So I think you do need to be able to paint the broader picture. You don't have to get into the details, but giving some sort of contextual information and, to bring this full circle in terms of just how folks are using AI, context matters. And it's not just about raw data, it's not just about information. A lot of context is needed. And that's very much true for your team and then the folks who work for you.
Absolutely. No, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, we're going to pivot. We've talked about all this opportunity for a second, but now I'd love to unpack some of the challenges or potential blind spots that marketers may face as they transition to this AI first performance model. What are you facing? What are you seeing people face at this stage?
So, 2 points come straight to mind. I would say the first one is when AI first broke out into the scene, I think a lot of folks fell a bit in love with the idea of I'm going to see an immediate ROI. I'm going to see a plug and play solution, something that is I can generate value with, a very quick turnaround. So I think that mentality, again, based on everything we've seen in 2025, is somewhat going to change in 26. But I think that's very much a trap that someone could fall into. You have to have an understanding of what is the goal, what is the tool. There's a lot of plug and play tools out there. You give an example yourself, but it has to be brought into the appropriate system or brought into the appropriate scenario in order to actually yield a positive result. You can't just automatically assume that that's going to happen. So I think that's one potential blind spot or pitfall that could occur out there. The second piece I would say is just when you are evaluating or defining what your project should look like. A big question you should ask yourself is what is your acceptable error rate? Um, AI and any LLM out there makes mistakes, makes errors. Knowing what your error rate is going to be able to define or guide you in terms of what the decisions need to be and how you should structure any given project. To put an example to that, if I'm using an LLM to generate social media posts, I have a much more high acceptable error rate if there's a misspelling, if there's minor grammatical errors. I mean, that happens on social media all the time. It's not great, but it's not the end of the world, just because that's the world day and age that we live in when it comes to social media. However, if I was using LLM to, let's say, digest, critique, and review a legal document, my error rate is zero. I do not want any component of that to be misinterpreted, missed. Any facet of that type of problem is again, I have an error rate of zero. So understanding that in terms of what the problem on the project looks like first and what is the acceptable error rate, I think that's a key piece that a lot of people just never think out loud or never say out loud as to what it is. But it's a critical component because that really defines how AI can be integrated into your project. Again, if I were to use those two examples on the social media piece, it allows me to move fairly quickly because I have a higher error rate. Sure, I'll make some mistakes, but I can make mistakes, I can learn, I can reiterate, I can adapt, etc. So it allows me to move very, very quickly out the door, and I'm okay with that. And that's a great cadence for evolution in that particular use of AI. On the legal side, if I were to use that, it's going to be a much more of a slow process because again, if my error rate is zero in that example, I have to make sure straight out of the gate maybe I'm not recouping all of the positives, all of the ROI, but I'm definitely not making any mistakes straight out of the gate, right? There's a very, very different set of rules in terms of what I would determine the project to be a success. So again, it's going to be different for everyone depending on what the audience, what the project is, or what the product or service is. But ask yourself that question out loud and define it and make that well known because that's really going to be um, a really strong, a very defining rule in how you make a lot of decisions within your AI project as well. Outside of that, I would just add one more piece, which is just talking about data. And again, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but data fragmentation happens, data siloing happens. It's if you want to make a personalized um, experience, if you want to make smarter decisions, you got to be able to consolidate that and draw insights. And that's going to be a tug of war because we're going to be moving into a world where folks and businesses don't want to give you a ton of data. And if anything, want you to delete data, consent to it, etc. Rightfully so. But that's going to be a tug of war. How much information can I extract in order to give you a very dedicated and personalized experience without and while not encroaching on the fact that you don't want to give me a ton of data as well. So I think those pieces are going to be, a lot of pitfalls there, but I think that's what folks are going to have to navigate through in 2026.
Yeah, I think that's I couldn't agree more. And that I love that discussion about the error rate is in your projects around AI. As I think about that, I think the alignment behind those acceptable error rates with your stakeholders within your organization is a critical aspect of that too. Um, Compliance teams, legal, finance, et cetera. You'll want to make sure that they're in alignment on for your organization. Is that error rate acceptable or not for
Yeah, and
that?
that in itself could be a project, right? Is aligning
Yeah.
internally what the
Yes.
acceptable error rate is. So yeah, but necessary part of the solution design.
Absolutely. That's the industry we're in. So,
Right.
um, cool. Well, I want to have you put your brand hat on for a second and talk a little bit about how you see AI influencing customer engagement and trust in financial services. I think we've skirted around that a little bit, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that aspect of this.
So I think it's a much more impactful question in our world when you think about financial services and products. Again, when you're thinking about commodities or commodity-like type products and services. I sort of mentioned earlier the example of comparing two phones, right? An iPhone versus an Android. That's very straightforward. But when a customer or user is trying to do comparative research, um, there's going to be a lot of there's LLMs are going to be drawing from again from your brand values, as I mentioned before. So making sure that there's some brand alignment there, making sure that there's clarity around what it is your brand stands for and what you can provide to your audiences is going to be fairly critical. And then making sure that you have the appropriate assets, whether it's content, whether it's partnerships with publications, just to make sure that that North Star is echoed in everything that you have is going to be fairly critical within that. And as a derivative of that equation is, I think you actually touched upon this, is you're going to see a lot more publications out there. Comparative content is growing, and with AI leveraging a lot of that, you're going to see a lot more publications enter the space, whether it be in a publication capacity or as a brokering capacity as well. You're going to see a lot of that increase as well because their content is what a lot of LLMs draw on in today's world, because that's often the question. I would say more internally focused in terms of what does an interaction look like, and I would say this even from things we've seen, is just the nature of the conversation has changed. If you were to rewind the clock, let's call it 10 years ago, if someone was looking for financing for their business, it would often be, here's my problem, what can you do for me? Or what can you tell me? Right? It's a lot more open-ended and it's a lot more inquisitive in terms of the first conversation you could have. And so you look at, hey, I'm looking to expand my business. What kind of financing makes sense there? I'm looking to acquire another business. What kind of financing makes sense there? So again, it's all positive conversations, but it's much more inquisitive. In today's world, with AI being much more ingrained in the research capacity, the conversation changes towards, I'm aware of this in the market, and I have an expectation based on that research. I'm looking for you to confirm that or exceed that, right? So whether it be rates, whether it be the customer service, whether it be whatever the value prop may be, there's now more and more folks walking through the front door with an expectation that they are anchored to. And it is up to us to, again, meet and exceed, as long as it's feasible and within our realm to be able to provide that. But there's really a challenge for us, and that's actually one of the exciting things that we look at in conversations we have outside of the AI world is, looking at our sales processes, our customer service processes to make sure that we are very much aligned towards what folks are looking for and what their expectations are when they reach out to us, right? They've done a lot of research on their part, but they walk in with much more information than they did 10 years ago. And it's up to us now to meet that. Because if there's any sort of misalignment there from what they expected from you versus what they're actually receiving in your relationship with them, that's going to only sour a relationship from the get-go. And so it's up to you to sort of be able to step around that and really deliver again in line with what your brand is looking to offer.
That's really powerful. That it's not just online, offline, but it's AI, human, the combination of those interactions that are driving the impression that your brand is giving at the end of the day. And is that a consistent message? Is it, and it's really important to pay attention to both, I would think, based on what you.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. I mean, I would say, and I've said this in all the circles when we chat about this, is that, when you look at an AI investment, I think you need to make almost a reciprocal investment in the human talent as well. Like it has to be aligned. It's not just about, oh, I'm going to invest in AI and that's going to solve all of my problems. The example we talk about when you're looking at aligning with uh, the search and research component of the user base, even if you're, the perfect happy path where your brand is aligned, you've communicated that and LLMs are picking up on that. If you're unable to translate that into reality, which is your sales or customer service or service, any type of servicing process, that all falls apart. There has to be alignment. Is this a transparent way of and are you truly communicating what your brand and your company stands for? And can you actually act on that? That requires human talent investment as well. You can't just do it on the AI side. Hopefully you get a bunch of folks interested in wanting to learn more about you, and then you see where it goes. You have to follow through. You've got folks interested, you've been able to get out in the market, and folks are able to find you and your brand. But in terms of the actual servicing and sales component, you have to follow suit in terms of, yes, the way we operate is very much true to what we've communicated about what our brand stands for.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Okay, so I want to jump to our last question, which is simply what advice would you give to banking and financial services marketers as they prepare for 26? Any final thoughts there or
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of everything we've kind of discussed so far, but just to kind of package it all nicely, I would say, first off, when it comes to AI investments, you know, understand the lay of the land. Who are the other players in the space? Where do you fall on the board? Just a real quick self-assessment on where you stand in the world today. And that could be through research, that could be just, again, assessments of what your data structures look like, but just truly understand what it is where you are today. Second is really clean definitions of what the project is, whatever the AI investment would be. And again, AI does typically one of three things in today's world. It either creates, it either automates, or it analyzes, right? It's usually going to fall into one of those three in terms of a AI or an agent introduction. So what is the definition? What is the output that you're looking for? And what is your acceptable error rate within that? So def clear definitions and communication across those first 2 points, I think is really just what your base structure is before you start jumping into any tactics, because the tactics is not going to save you if that first part is not in place. So I think that's really the first part. Outside of that, what I would say is everything we've talked about today, again, AI can impact positively across a variety of fronts. So I don't think there's going to be a specific set of steps, one, two, three, that you can apply to your project. What I think you need to walk away from anything is understanding the appropriate methodology for solution design. Um, Again, whether you're looking to create something, analyze something, automate something, or align with what behaviors are going out there in the user base, they're all very, very different problems, right? So the steps and the tactics aren't going to be the same across any one of those initiatives, but understanding what the methodology is in order to craft the appropriate solution where AI can be inserted into, whether it be defining the problem, what is the appropriate investment, do I have the right base? These are the important questions to ask yourself before you start saying, okay, I'm ready for investment. And again, be ready to sort of iterate and evolve as very much this entire industry and the user base is evolving as well.
100%? That's a good recap and some interesting different nuggets too. That's terrific. Okay, well, I have peppered you with enough questions. We're going to take some audience questions that they're peppering us in a minute. Before we do that, we're going to pepper them with a question. So we have a poll question that has just come up, and so we just asked that everyone on the webinar today just give us your response. But the question is basically, as you look toward 2026. Which shift in performance marketing will have the biggest impact on your customer acquisition strategy? So, is it the greater reliance on AI to optimize targeting and media efficiency? Is it tighter integration of data across channels and teams? Is it growing expectations for personalized, creative-led experiences? Or lastly, is it increased pressure to prove measurable ROI across the funnel? I'm sure there are others as well, but these are the four we're giving you. So if you take a minute, and give your vote, we'll probably close that poll in about 10 seconds or so. So don't ponder too long. Just go ahead and give us your answer. And then I do see we have at least one question that has come in, which we'll answer in a minute. Okay, do we have poll results? Okay. coming in at number one is tighter integration. Well, it's a tie, excuse me. Tighter integration of data across channels and teams, and then growing expectations for personalized creative-led experiences. Do you want to talk any initial reactions from you, Milroy, about maybe the data question?
I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but yeah, that second point, the tight integration of data across all channels and teams. I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit. So yeah, that's going to be at the forefront. It's not about the wealth of data as well. It's is there a harmonious structure for all the data points as well, right? So I think that's yeah, absolutely going to be um, the forefront of a lot of initiatives as well, whether it be AI related or not, but clean, cohesive data across the board, really, really important. The personalized piece, yeah, I think that's very, I'll say forward thinking, even though it's very much an expectation today. But we kind of talked about how interactions with AI from a user base is ever evolving, and that's a bit of a moving target. Um, I think somewhat we expect it in our daily lives as well. It's every experience we have, I'm expecting for you to sort of align with what I'm looking for or the way I speak or whatever it may be. There's a lot of expectations that we may or may not bring into any conversation that we have. So I think even from a customer or user base, that's only going to grow. So from a
Yeah.
brand's perspective, you know, how do we do that at scale? And the answer is going to be a little bit tied to that first one is you need to have good data, you need to be able to leverage it, and you need to be able to leverage it in the appropriate way, given again the growing concerns around data security, data privacy, things of that nature. So not too shocked at that. That is how we see the world is moving.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, I think the that second one, I look at it as it could be in customer marketing, certainly personalized experiences where you know the customer and you have first party data to access. That's the more traditional use case. I think, as you said, the holy grail ultimately is can we push that data out into prospect acquisition campaigns where you're targeting the right audience with the right creative that's relevant, the experience that they have when they land on your page and the offer strategy, et cetera, is all personalized. That's where I think it can get pretty exciting. But there's a lot of work to be done to sort of push toward that end goal. There are parts we you can do it. There are companies that are starting to do that pretty successfully. So that's an interesting one. Well, great. Well, thank you for to the audience for answering our question. It looks like we just have one question so far. So I will, let's go ahead and ask that question. I'll read it out loud and then we'll see what we can do to answer that. Question from Miriam. Thank you, Miriam. What will be the amicable solution for reactivating accounts wherein more than 70% of its customers are dormant? Likewise, what would lead to such many accounts being dormant? I I have some thoughts on that, but do you have any initial reactions? In this case,
So
I mean, it's hard to understand
uh,
what good product it is, but I think we could probably
that's what was going to be my first question. It really depends on what the product or service is because interaction with the particular product or service that cadence is very different. I mean, if we're talking about a checking account versus an investment account, two very very different frequencies
sure.
that we would expect. So, but regardless, if you're talking about dormancy, um, in any product, especially within the financial world. That means that they have either no need, they found a better option, or something else about the experience has jaded them towards wanting to do a transaction or some sort of business with you. It usually falls into one of those three. It's really tough for me to say, based on just the question alone, which one is most likely the case. It requires a deeper dive, but that's really where it starts off is what is there some data point or something that can indicate which alley is that going towards when it comes to dormancy? In terms of, for each one of those, if there's no sense of urgency or no need, there's not much you can do because when it comes to a product or service, you want to have conversations with folks who are in market for your particular product or service. You want to absolutely stay top of mind. Is there any sort of value add that you can generate to them? But in terms of trying to pitch a product, pitch a service towards them if they're not in market, that's going to be an uphill battle. So there's not much to do there. For the folks who are getting that product or service from a competitor, that's absolutely the segment that you need to focus on because you have essentially got someone into your ecosystem, but they've chosen not to do business with you because they found a substitute or a replacement within the market. So that requires a further question, which is why, right? Is it the product itself? Is it the service itself? Is it the cost, the price? Is there something there that you're missing that renders you uncompetitive in the market? And then final piece is the audience jaded from an experience, and that happens in the financial world. Someone had a bad experience with the credit card they have, so now I'm going to close my checking account and move my business elsewhere. Right? Two unrelated products, relatively speaking, but there's a translation there because of the experience and how it ties up to a brand. Right? Now that's a very specific example, but you can see how there's a ripple effect that can occur when there's an experience tied to a brand. So
Yeah. Yeah.
if anything, it just my short answer is really sort of deep dive and see if you can point yourself in the right direction as to where the gap is, because that's going to give you direction on how to address that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you have to answer that second question, the second part of the question, which is what would lead to accounts being dormant before you could really come up with the right actions, for to reactivate them. And I would say be careful. You want to be strategic about that reactivation, especially if it's like a unsecured lending product, like a credit card, for example. Reactivation is not always a good thing if it's someone who's had something happened to their income or their credit and they become credit seeking. All of a sudden they activate your credit card and you've got bad debt on your hands. So you really want to really focus on those that are the ones you want to activate first and foremost. And then why did they go to Milroy's point? What was the driver? Was it a competitive thing? Was it a customer service issue? What was it? Then you can devise the right tactics, and you can then get proactive about it by finding triggers that might help you prevent that in the future too. That would be the other piece. How do you prevent the sort of the going into dormancy by having more data around what do these customers look like before they go dormant? Are there certain triggers then you can intercept them? So, okay. There are no more questions. Okay, one good question. So we can close the webinar and want to thank everyone for joining us. Milroy, thank you for participating with me today. I thought this had some amazing insights. I hope everyone also felt the same. If the audience has further questions, they can reach us at marketing@iQuanti.com. If you have other questions, again, it's marketing@iQuanti.com. And again, thank you. I really enjoyed this, Milroy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.